There is a kind of silence that hurts more than an insult. It is the silence people give you when they have already decided your dream is a joke. Years later, the men who once laughed at Ryan Hale would stand outside his factory gates before sunrise, hats in their hands, waiting for work. Some of them had mocked him in the market. Some had rolled their eyes when he spoke. Some had told him, right to his face, that a poor boy from a forgotten farming town had no business dreaming like a king. But that part came later. To understand how those same men ended up asking Ryan for a place in the world he built, you have to go back to when he was just a boy with dust on his shoes, questions in his head, and a future nobody could see. Ryan was born into an ordinary family in a small town that lived by the fields and feared the seasons. There was no fortune waiting for him, no powerful family name, no easy road. Just a hardworking father, a gentle mother, a modest home, and a village full of people who believed life was something you survived, not something you changed. But Ryan was different from the beginning. As a child, he would take apart broken tools, rusted locks, old lanterns, anything he could get his hands on, not to destroy them, but to understand them. He wanted to know why things worked, why they failed, and why people accepted broken systems just because they had existed for a long time. And when he got older, his questions became dangerous. Why did farmers work themselves half to death and still stay poor? Why did drought keep winning every summer? Why did the town bow its head to suffering as if suffering were normal? Most people did not admire those questions. They laughed at them. And when Ryan said, more than once, that one day he would build something that would make life better for everyone in that town, the laughter only got louder. To them, he was naive, a dreamer, a boy talking far above his place. But what nobody understood then was that Ryan was not dreaming to impress anyone. He was dreaming because he could already see that the life around him was not fate. It was a problem, and he intended to solve it. And the moment Ryan decided he would not just complain about the town's problems, but actually solve them, was the moment people stopped seeing him as strange and started calling him dangerous. By the time he turned 20, most young men in that town had already accepted the shape of their lives. They would work the land, obey the weather, complain when the harvest failed, and then do it all again next year. It was not a good life, but it was familiar, and for many people, familiar feels safer than hope. Ryan could not live that way. While others chased steady wages, he chased patterns. He walked the fields at sunrise and again at dusk. He watched dry soil crack open under the summer heat. He watched old men lift water by hand until their backs trembled. He watched mothers count sacks of grain like they were counting prayers. And every year, when the heat came hard and the rivers felt too far away, the same fear spread across the town. Not just fear of losing crops, but fear of losing another year of life to the same merciless cycle. Ryan saw something most people didn't see. The problem was not that the villagers were lazy. They were exhausted. The problem was not fate. The problem was the way everything had always been done. So he began building. He gathered discarded metal, worn gears, cracked wooden wheels, broken piping, rusted farm parts. Anything he could carry, salvage, study, or reshape. His hands were always dirty. His clothes smelled of oil and dust. Late at night, long after the rest of the town had gone dark, light still leaked through the cracks of the shed behind his parents' house. That was where the whispers began. At first, people laughed the way people always laugh when they do not understand what someone is doing. Then the laughter sharpened. Men in the market started calling him the village fool. Women shook their heads and said Ryan had let strange ideas poison his mind. Boys his own age followed him with jokes and mocking little bows, as if he were some ridiculous genius from a fairy tale. And Gavin enjoyed it more than anyone. He would lean against a fence or a market post and call out loud enough for others to hear, "So tell us, Ryan, have you fixed the sun yet? Or are you still trying to boss around the weather?" People laughed, always laughed. And little by little, the latter became pressure. Ryan's father, Elias, watched all of this with growing worry. He was not a cruel man. He was a tired man, and tired men often mistake survival for wisdom. One evening, after Ryan came in late with grease on his hands and new sketches tucked under his arm, Elias finally said, "Dreams are cheap when someone else is paying for the roof over your head." That one landed hard, because Ryan loved his father, and deep down, he knew Elias was speaking from fear, not hatred, fear that his son would waste his youth, fear that bright ideas would turn into a lifetime of humiliation, fear that the world crushes men like Ryan, because it always has. But not everyone looked at him with contempt. There was an old mechanic in town named Mr. Rowan, a quiet man with a bent back and watchful eyes. He had repaired mills, carts, pumps, and broken tools for half the county. He did not flatter Ryan. He did not call him gifted. He simply watched him work, watched him fail, watched him begin again. Then one evening, after turning one of Ryan's rough sketches in his weathered hands, Mr. Rowan said, "If you want people to stop laughing, don't give them a speech. Give them a result." Ryan didn't answer, but he never forgot it, because what he didn't realize yet was that the town was about to push him harder than ever before, and that pressure was about to turn his wild ideas into something real. And that pressure came down hardest the summer Ryan finally tried to prove that his ideas could do more than fill a shed with noise. That year, the heat arrived early and stayed longer than anyone expected. Week after week, the sun pressed down on the fields like punishment. The soil split open. The shallow channels dried up. Men walked farther for water and came back with less of it. Women stood in doorways, staring toward the fields with that same old look people wear when they already know trouble is coming but still pray they be wrong. Ryan had seen this before, but this time he was not willing to stand there and watch the town surrender to it again. For months, he had been working on a crude water transfer system, a rough machine built from salvaged pipe, improvised valves, old wheel parts, and a hand-built driving mechanism that could keep water moving over distance with far less labor than hauling it bucket by bucket. It was ugly, loud, imperfect, but in Ryan's mind, it could work, not in theory, in real life, out there, where it mattered. And because he was still young, still hungry, and still foolish enough to believe that truth alone could win people over, he made a mistake. He brought the machine to the center of town before it was ready. A few landowners came. Some farmers came because they were desperate. Mayor Thomas Vane came because public failures were a form of entertainment to him. Gavin came smiling, already prepared to enjoy the show. Even Elias stood at the edge of the crowd, face tight with worry. Ryan explained how the system could pull and guide water from the outer river channels toward the driest farming strips. He spoke fast at first, then steadier, then with real conviction. For a brief moment, people actually listened. Then he turned the mechanism on. The frame shuddered. One pipe rattled loose. The pressure dropped. Water burst out the wrong side, splashing into the dirt while the wheel jammed with a grinding sound so ugly it felt embarrassing all by itself. Ryan rushed forward, hands shaking, trying to fix it in front of everyone. But once public failure begins, it rarely gives a man time to recover. The laughter started with Gavin. Then another voice joined in. Then another. And when Mayor Vane stepped forward and said, "A desperate town does not need fantasies dressed up as inventions," whatever fragile respect Ryan still had left in that crowd died on the spot. He dragged the broken machine home in silence. That night was worse than the failure itself. No speech, no comfort, no defense. His father looked at the damaged parts scattered across the shed floor and said, quietly, "Ryan, there comes a point when a man has to stop asking the world to believe in him." That sentence cut deeper than the mayor's insult, because it came from the one voice Ryan had spent his whole life hoping would one day understand him. For 2 days, he did nothing. He sat by the dry edge of a field and watched people work harder than they should have had to work. He watched boys carrying water they were too young to carry. He watched grown men pretending not to be afraid. And slowly, something inside him changed. He realized he had been trying too hard to make people admire the idea, when he should have been obsessed with solving the pain. So he went back to the river, back to the fields, back to the pipes, the angles, the flow, the pressure, the distance. He stopped building for applause. He started building for survival. And when he returned to the workbench this time, he was not trying to look smart anymore. He was trying to save a harvest. What he didn't know yet was that this new version would become the first invention that forced the entire town to see him differently. And when that first harvest survived the heat, something shifted in the town. Not all at once, not cleanly, but enough for people to feel that the ground beneath their old beliefs was beginning to crack. Ryan's new system was far from beautiful. It was built from patched metal, rough joints, hand-cut channels, and a driving mechanism that still sounded like it was arguing with itself every time it ran. But beauty was not the point. Water was, and for the first time in years, several of the Dreest fields held on through the worst part of summer, because Ryan had found a way to pull water from the distant river routes and guide it where it was needed most. At first, people did what people always do when truth embarrasses them. They acted cautious, then curious, then quietly dependent. Farmers who had laughed at Ryan months earlier now stood beside his channels, pretending they were simply interested in how it worked. Men who had mocked his sketches suddenly wanted him to look at their land. Even those who hated being proven wrong began using his system when no one important was watching. But Ryan did not waste energy on their pride. He was too busy watching, learning, improving. Because success, real success, does not calm a mind like his. It sharpens it. And that was when the next problem came into focus. Every autumn, after months of labor, after planting, watering, waiting, and praying, waves of locusts would descend on the fields and strip them with terrifying speed. Whole sections of crops could vanish in days, sometimes in hours. Families who had barely recovered from summer drought would stand helpless again, watching their future get eaten alive. Ryan watched that too. He studied the way the insects moved, where they gathered, what plants they avoided, what scents seemed to shift their pattern. For weeks, he worked with crushed herbs, mineral compounds, oils, and mixtures so full, even he could barely stand near them. Some failed instantly, some damaged leaves, some did nothing at all. But Ryan kept testing, adjusting, observing. Then one season, just before the first great swarm reached the edge of the eastern fields, he was ready. The solution was simple in appearance, which is often the mark of something brilliant. A treatable compound, diluted and spread across the vulnerable crop lines, not to destroy the locusts, but to drive them away before they settled. Farmers were skeptical. Some feared it would poison the land. Others said Ryan had gotten lucky once and now thought he could outsmart nature itself. But what happened next stunned them. The locusts came, they circled, they dropped lower, and then they turned. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to spare the fields that mattered. Enough to keep the season alive. Enough to make even the proudest men in town stop speaking for a moment and simply stare. That was the point when Ryan ceased to be a local curiosity and became something much harder to dismiss. After that came the third invention, tools that reduced wasted labor in harvesting and transport. Then the fourth, methods and devices that helped preserve crops longer after they were gathered, cutting loss and increasing profit. One result led to another. One solved problem exposed the next. And with every success, the distance between Ryan and the people who once mocked him grew wider. By 35, his name had traveled far beyond the town. Farmers from other counties came to study his work. Merchants came with offers. Officials who would once have ignored a man like Ryan now spoke his name with forced respect. Even Mayor Vane changed his tone, praising Ryan in public as if he had recognized his worth from the beginning. But life has a brutal sense of irony, because while Ryan was rising, Gavin Cole was sinking. He had spent years laughing at change instead of preparing for it. And by the time Ryan turned 40 and opened a real company to build his inventions at scale, with workshops, workers' orders, and growing demand, the impossible finally happened. The men who once laughed at Ryan's dream began lining up outside his gates, asking if there was room for them inside the future he had built. And when those men finally stood outside Ryan's gates, asking for work instead of offering laughter, he faced the one test that success always brings. Not the test of skill, not the test of money, the test of character. Ryan saw Gavin in that line, saw the lowered eyes, saw the pride that had been worn down by time, bad choices, and a world that no longer rewarded mockery. Years earlier, Gavin had laughed the loudest. He had treated Ryan's dream like entertainment. And now here he was, older, quieter, asking for a chance to earn a living inside the very future he once mocked. Ryan could have humiliated him. He could have made a speech. He could have enjoyed the moment. many men would have. But Ryan had spent too many years building something meaningful to shrink himself into a petty victory. So he gave Gavin a job, not because the past did not matter, but because Ryan had learned that a man does not prove greatness by standing above broken people. He proves it by building something large enough to give them a way forward. By the time Ryan was nearing 50, his company had become more than a factory. It was the engine of the whole county. The irrigation systems he designed had saved fields from drought. The locust-repelling compound had protected harvests that once would have been wiped out. His later tools made planting easier, hauling faster, and storage safer. What started as one young man's stubborn refusal to accept suffering as normal had turned into workshops, supply routes, wages, opportunity, and dignity. The town itself had changed. Homes were sturdier. Shops stayed open later. Parents worried less about losing everything to one bad season. Young people who once dreamed only of escape could now imagine a future close to home. For the first time in generations, prosperity did not belong only to distant cities. It had reached their soil. One evening, as the last workers left the factory yard, Ryan stood beside his father and watched them go. Boots scraped the gravel. Wagon wheels rolled out into the fading light. Men and women carried home the kind of exhaustion that comes with honest work and steady pay. A different kind of tired than the one this town had known before. Elias looked over the factory grounds, then out toward the fields beyond them. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then quietly, almost like a confession, he said, "I was afraid your dream would make you a fool. I never imagined it would feed half this county." Ryan did not answer right away, because the truth was, the dream had cost him. It had cost him comfort, approval, sleep, pride, and years of being misunderstood. But in the end, it gave something back that was bigger than revenge, bigger than success, even bigger than recognition. It made him useful. And maybe that is the real lesson. People will laugh at what they cannot see. They will call your vision foolish simply because it arrived before their imagination did. But if your dream solves real pain, if it helps real people, time has a way of turning ridicule into respect. If this story meant something to you, gave you a new perspective, or a lesson you needed so you can finally do something with your life, please like this video and share it with someone who needs it. And here's a simple question for you. Have you ever believed in something before anyone else did? Write your answer in the comments so everyone can read your perspective too. I'll be back with another story to help you keep growing. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.